In this video, I'm going to revisit Azure Functions. And I'm saying revisit because a while ago I used Azure Functions when it was still version 2, but version 3 was coming out just like soon. And so there was a bunch of blog posts about version 3, but there's also some documentation about version 2. And it seems like when you Google for stuff like how does this work, everything got mixed up. And I was a little bit frustrated when I worked with it. Especially, I didn't understand the Azure portal just yet and how cloud stuff worked. So all in all, I was successful, but it was a bit hard to work with. And recently, I had a look at Azure Static Web Apps, and that worked so well that I thought, why not look at Azure Functions again now that version 3 is out for Node.js? Well, it has been out for a while, I guess, but for me that was new. So I'm revisiting it this video. I'm just going to build a function and then we'll just look at that together and see what comes out of it. Let's do this. First things first, I recently learned that Azure Functions comes with this amazing vscode plugin. And this plugin helps you to not having to go to the portal website. Because to be pretty honest, I don't really like the portal website. It has a kind of a super nerdy interface and it has so many options and features. And you know what, it kind of works, but it's also really nice to have everything in one place. And in this case, that's VS Code. So if you look at my screen here, you have Azure Functions here as a plugin. And it helps you with a lot of things because it can kind of scaffold your Azure Functions project. And it can create functions for you, it can publish functions for you, you can put your environment variables in it, you can do a whole bunch of stuff that basically makes this work quite seamlessly. And this is the thing we want, right? We want like a no-frills developer experience. And I think Microsoft kind of nailed it for this. And they had this in previous versions, I just didn't know of it and I didn't know how to locally do debugging and stuff like that, but actually it's pretty simple. So this page just shows you a little bit like how do I make a new features project? How do I connect it to my debugging? How do I create like a local function? How do I upload my functions to the cloud so they work? How do they get a URL? Stuff like that, right? So this is actually a really nice thing. And you can see it here. So you actually get an Azure icon here. And it lets you log into your Azure subscription. So I've already done that because you don't want to look at me logging into an Azure subscription. So when you click on that, like I have a Visual Studio Enterprise account because of my work at Valtech, which I'm really privileged for. And as you can see, I have Fatty, Strava Visualize, and Tim's start page. So Fatty and Strava Visualize are version 2 Azure Functions projects. And Tim's start page is the newest one that I built like yesterday. So I'm going to show you a little bit about this. So Tim's start page is actually this page. This is my start page. So when I open a browser, you see this. So I wanted quick links to click on stuff, but what I also wanted, because I'm a content creator and I like data, I want to see how my projects are going and how my YouTube stats are growing. So this statistic stuff and this statistic stuff actually comes from my Azure Functions. And I'm planning to enrich this a little bit more with more functions because I want my Google Analytics for my website. I want more Twitter stuff. And I do that all with functions. And that's a really nice way because this page is basically a PWA. It's static. It loads instantly. And then there's basically an async call, an AJAX call to those functions. And then this comes back. So if you look in the code, my local project is here, so it knows when I'm in a folder of Azure Functions, it found those functions. You see, I also have Google Analytics stats, even though you don't see them yet on my page, still working on it. So now when we look at the code here, you can actually see a fully scaffolded page by that plugin from Azure. So I didn't do any of this. I just added the Twitter stats and the YouTube stats in the GA stats one. And I'll show you in a sec how I did that. But like it creates files for you. It creates your package JSON. Of course, I myself added my dependencies, but local settings, all of this stuff is added by Azure. So this is not a video where we go into that, but just know if you didn't use this, you had to set this up yourself and you read all the docs. And of course, it's good to read the docs. Not that I do that, but you should. it scaffolds it for you. That's really nice. So now you can actually see when I open this up here, so it goes to Azure, fetches project settings for me. So I can actually see here when I click on my YouTube stats, it gives me the basics of what this function is. So it's an HTTP trigger. So when you hit an HTTP endpoint, it does something. There are many different ways. We won't go into that now. But you have the auth level. So this is a public one. Everybody can just hit up this function and get data. You also have ones where you need to log in or have a key. Then we have application settings, and here you can put all your environment variables, because like I'm querying Google. I need an API key. I store it here. And then it has a whole bunch of other stuff we don't really need to go into now. But when you look at my code and you look at, let's say, my Twitter statistics, it creates for you an index file, a function.json, and a sample.dat, so a data file. I actually haven't used the data file, but you can use this as data into your functions. So the function itself is actually relatively simple. One thing to note, it's an async function, right? So the module exports is an async function in Node.js, and basically what you get is context. And you can also get request, but I don't use a request in this one, so I removed it. But so basically what you have to do, because it's an async function, you basically have to do stuff with promises or async await, right? So I'm getting my account statistics with an await, my user data becomes something, and then basically the rest is for response. So the context is basically the server, and you add a response to it. And because it's an async function, this whole thing just returns. So the data that I catch is the body of the response, and then I can add some headers, and this basically just returns. And this is how simple it is. So if I wanted to, let's just make a new function to show you what you get and then what you can do with that. Okay, so here in Tim start page, I want a new function, and we're gonna, you see there's a whole bunch of stuff, but we just want to have an HTTP trigger now. So it's YouTube, test, whatever, we are YouTube, right? Okay, so we're gonna make it autonomous, and now it already worked, right? So you see, including my typo, my YouTube test is here, and this is what you get by default. So it created for me this function, and it created for us that schema that we looked at before, and you get that sample data file. So now we can actually run this locally and see how it works. So you can actually do npm start, and you can do this inside your project directory because it's scaffolded by vscode. And this is really, really cool. So now you can have a look actually at, this is our YouTube test with typo, and it just created this for us. So we can have a look here. And please pass a name on the query string or in the, let's zoom it in. Well, if we look at that code and we look at this thing, it basically wants the request query name. So it needs that name so it can actually return hello. So we can do name is Tim, and then it says hello Tim. This is a really simple Azure function clearly. And so when you don't add that, it just gives you the error message, which is here. So now that we have this, and you understand the fact that you have to add the stuff to the context and you get stuff in request, you can do a whole bunch of stuff. So if we now go back to my YouTube function that for some reason, oh, this is my Twitter function. It was not saved, but so what I basically do, I just have a get account stats function that returns a promise, which basically I create a Twitter client. It's just the npm Twitter package. It has all my environment variables, and then I basically just create a new promise. Twitter get user show with options, and the option is screen name me, Tim Bennix. It gets my stuff. I map it a little bit to whatever data I want, and then I fulfill it. So the promise returns something. Once I get it and there's an error, I actually just go directly in line of my promise, and I say this is a 500 error, and the body is the error, and I send it as JSON. And if it's not an error, I will just output it like that. So Let's go there and then go back to where is that? This is my Twitter stats. It loads a little bit. Okay, so it's calling Twitter now. So that is likely why it takes some time. Or maybe it's off. Or there's an issue, cannot read property ID of undefined. I might have a boo-boo, but I don't know why. Oh, most likely because locally the process env is maybe not working. I've had that issue before. Let's not have this stop us. I'm not going to type these keys in here to show you how it works locally. This is something I have to figure out myself. So if anyone from Microsoft is watching this, please help me. What we can do, however, is say, let's upload those functions to the cloud. So you can actually say deploy function app. Let's do deploy. So I'm going to deploy to Tim's start page. And then I say deploy override, sure. Okay, so now it's also going to add our YouTube with typo test. But you can see it just goes into the terminal here in VS Code and it does everything. It does an npm install, a prune to clean up the packages. And now we just wait a little bit.
A few moments later.
So completed. So we can actually view the output to see what happened. So currently it's querying some of the triggers and there are our functions. So now when we visit it on timstartpage.azurewebsites.net, open. Yes. Would be nice if it worked this time, right? There it is. So now it was able to get the process.env variables and it worked. So you can see my latest tweet and my followers. So now it's online and I can just query it. So that's what I do here. I basically query that and I do the same here. So how that works is another video. This is just doing a window fetch, getting an AJAX call, filling a Vue.js store, stuff like that. But this was actually a very simple thing to do. It was very smooth to do. It was very easy to make new applications or new functions. I just added the YouTube test one, right? So let's see if that works. YouTube test name equals Tim. Beam. There it is. Zoom in. It works. That was how easy it was to create a new function. So that's it for this video. Short but sweet. And I encourage you to try this. Like, decentralize your stuff because it's very easy now to add additional things. It's very easy to scale only one of them. And if you don't use a function, you don't pay for it. So go away from the big hosting packages where everything is a monolith, but decentralize and use this stuff. Okay, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.